at some point. There was also a port visit to Guam in February when she had been at sea for about a month. So there are other vectors, of course, in which COVID could have been introduced to the ship. Understanding exactly who patient zero is probably going to be an impossible task. So we are doing our very best to prioritize those that are first tested, those that are symptomatic. And as the Secretary mentioned in his numbers, of the 93 cases, you have 86 that are symptomatic, which is indicative of the fact that those that are symptomatic go into the head of the line in terms of testing.
All right, we'll go to Nancy Youssef on the phone.
Thank you. I wonder if you could clarify a couple points. You mentioned that you're doing testing. Is testing all for COVID-19, or is it for influenza-like symptoms? And if so, what is the breakdown? And also, you mentioned that you had visited Guam 2 weeks earlier, that the Roosevelts had. So was the plan for the Roosevelt to return to Guam, and if so, what was the plan at that point?
So the return back to Guam was a regularly scheduled port visit. It just happened to coincide with, I think, 4 days after we had that initial case, that initial positive on the 22nd of March.
And if you could please repeat your first question.
Sure. You've talked about doing testing of all the sailors and how you've accelerated it. I'd like to know if those are all COVID-19 tests, or they test for influenza and then there are subsequent tests if someone comes back positive for COVID-19.
Thank you. Let me just kind of give you an overview of the testing plan or the algorithm. So our ships have the ability to test for upwards of 20 influenza-like illnesses. COVID-19 only recently has been added to that array as an FDA-approved diagnostic test. As the Secretary said, we had 4 deployed preventive medical units aboard on all 3 ships of the strike group. They have the ability to do what is known as surveillance testing for COVID-19. And so that was used in that expedient, emergent manner to identify those who were presumed positive. As diagnostic capability became more available, we have been confirming those in DoD laboratories. And I'm happy to report that now Naval Hospital Guam, due to a lot of hard work by many people, we were able to accelerate the establishment of diagnostic testing at Naval Hospital Guam, and that actually is live now as I speak. So it's important to understand the difference between surveillance testing and diagnostic testing. The team on the ship, in the overabundance of caution, wanted to identify those who had potentially had the virus and tested them, confirm that individually, and then got final confirmation with an FDA approved test. Over.
Right, Ryan Brown, will come to you next.
Thank you. I just had 2 quick follow-ups. The first, you said that the goal was to get about 2,700 sailors off the ship in the next few days or so. And then you also said there was about capacity to house about 3,000 in Guam. Is the limiting factor the housing capacity, or is it the number of sailors that are required to run things like the nuclear reactor that you need to keep on board? What is that 3,000 number? Is that the capacity, or is that what you need to keep, the delta is what you need on the ship?
So don't take 3,000 as a limit, right? We continue to work with the government of Guam and the local community to find additional spaces for these sailors to stay, particularly in hotel rooms. So our goal is to get a clean ship, right? We need about 1,000 people or so on that ship to keep those critical functions running, as the Secretary mentioned. And so we have people ashore that are isolated that have tested positive. We have others that are quarantined or isolated because they're considered to have been in close contact, right? And so over that 14-day restricted movement period, as they become clean, they haven't shown any symptoms, they get tested, and they're brought back on the ship. On board the ship, we, again, are trying very methodically to ensure that those sections of people, particularly think in terms of watch teams, that they are judiciously separated as well, so we don't have so we limit the risk of any cross-contamination.
And then just on the follow-up on a different topic, you said the Comfort was there in New York. Have they seen a single patient yet?
I'm not sure. I know the Mercy's had, as of yesterday when I was there, they've had 11 patients already. 9 are still on the ship as of yesterday. 2 have already been discharged from the Mercy. I was under the impression that Comfort was starting to see patients yesterday, but I don't know the numbers. Bruce, do you know?
None right now, but ready to go.
Yes, sir. No, they've been, they've been making the arrangements with the local health officials to identify those patients that are appropriate to be transferred to Comfort, and that process is in place, and I believe that patient arrival is imminent.
All right, we'll go to Dan Lamothe from the Post.
Identify themselves before they speak for those of us who don't recognize voices. Thank you.
The last was Surgeon General. All right, Dan Lamothe, Post.
Yes, thank you. Captain Crozier in his letter said that the Navy was failing to properly take care of its most trusted asset, our sailors. Family members have expressed similar sentiments in interviews. How do you respond to that?
Well, my response to that, it's disappointing to have him say that. However, at the same time, I know that that's not the truth. We have been working very, very hard with the ship, with the command structure to ensure that that's exactly what we're doing. It's our priority. We need those sailors to be safe. We need them to be healthy, and we need that ship to be operational. And so we're doing everything we can. As I mentioned yesterday, a lot of this is we're adjusting on the fly, and we need the feedback from the people on the ground to tell us what we need to do to bring more assistance as it's necessary. CO.
Just a couple of comments on that question, Mr. Lamothe. So in terms of creating, an environment where we have flat communications and, across the entire Navy enterprise, that we get both lessons learned in terms of things we should sustain and things that we need to change. Twice a day, we have synchronization sessions that go down to all of our 4, 3, and 2-star commanders and their staffs. And so across that enterprise, we are getting those inputs on a daily basis. We're getting requirements. We're trying to act as quickly as we can on those requirements, and we're trying to improve. Last night, we put out another message in a series of messages that we've been sending, this time directly to commanders. And their job is to identify, our number one priority, of course, is the safety and welfare of sailors and their families. And we can't thank families enough for all the support that they've given our sailors thus far. And the second priority is to maintain our mission readiness and to execute the missions as directed by the Secretary of Defense. You can't execute those missions operationally unless you have healthy crews. And so the input that we get back up the chain of command, like the Secretary of the Navy says, is incredibly important at speed so that we can act on it. We think that there was a communications breakdown potentially with the crew of the Theodore Roosevelt, but when we became aware yesterday morning of these concerns, we made sure that we were meeting expectations so that he could do thing one, which is to keep his crew healthy and safe. So I think that we've laid that flat, so to speak, in terms of ensuring those communication lines are open and they're positive, and there's an environment here that it's understood that we're here to break down barriers. And so we haven't seen that. We haven't had those kinds of complaints, or if we have received them, we've tried to act on them quickly.
And I'd like to say just further that my Chief of Staff has had conversations with the commanding officer of the ship prior to this letter coming out, making it very clear that if he felt that he was not getting the proper response from his chain of command, that he had a direct line into my office. So we're just making sure that they understand this. We understand this is a very unusual circumstance. We're all learning, but we care about, obviously, we care about the health and well-being of our sailors first, and so that's what we're trying to adjust to.
Tom Bowman, NPR.
Yeah, you keep saying number one priority is the safety of the sailors. If that's the case, why wouldn't you take all of the sailors off the ship, as the captain suggests, and disinfect the ship? He says you have to find lodging for 4,000. Sounds like you still haven't found that lodging. And frankly, it seems like there's a tug-of-war between the safety of the soldiers, which you say is a number one priority, and the ability to complete the mission. And we had this conversation last night with the head of the Pacific Fleet. He keeps saying if there's a crisis, we have to respond. So again, frankly, isn't the mission the number one priority?
Well, that's the delicate balance that we have to play here. Taking all the crew off the ship does not leave them safer. You can't leave a nuclear reactor there running without anybody on the ship.
10% on board. to maintain the reactor and
Right.
so forth.
It's not just the reactor, it's more than just the reactor. You have weapons systems, you have a variety of other
He laid
things.
that out in his letter.
I understand what he's saying. We're
Well, is
basic,
he right, though? I mean, you could do it with 10%?
I don't believe we can do it with 10%. I don't know, so what's your position?
I think the major difference, kind of the eye-opener for us, was the fact that he wanted to move at a greater speed to get people off the ship, right? And as he says in the opening paragraph of his letter, hey, look, if we have to fight today, we're ready to take in all lines, get the ship underway, and we're ready to get on mission. And so I think that the misunderstanding perhaps was the requirement at speed to get people off the ship. And so we had been identifying spaces and getting people off the ship. We are now moving people at speed to get them off the ship. And so in order to act on the requirement, we have to clearly understand the requirement. And that's why I spoke, Tom, to a potential comms breakdown wherever it occurred. And we're not looking to shoot the messenger here. We want to get this right.
All right, we'll go back to phones. Courtney Cubey.
Hi, thank you. Admiral Gilday, I think this was you who said you think there was a communications breakdown with the TR crew. Is that correct?
We haven't diagnosed that yet. I'm just supposing if they had a requirement and if we didn't know, if it wasn't acted upon, in the manner that the CO wanted, there was potentially a breakdown in communications there at some point.
Okay, so I guess my question is really, have you identified that? Because I have to, sort of following on Tom Bowman's question, after you guys first came out late last week and announced that there were a couple of cases and they were being flown off, the ship was out at sea, and then we hear soon after, a day or two later, whatever it was, that it pulls into Guam, we keep hearing over and over, well, that was a scheduled port visit. So it seems as if there hasn't been an urgency to respond to this and get the sailors off, when we all know there's absolutely no way to quarantine or isolate people when you're on a ship. So, I mean, I guess, this communications breakdown, did it occur at the beginning with the TR crew not telling you how significant the potential curve was here? Or I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about that.
We understood on a day-to-day basis, right, how many cases they had. And so it began at 2, and then we saw a precipitous rise. And so a question, right, in terms of the framework under which they're operating on the ship is, do you test first, as I mentioned before, based on symptomatic cases, and then isolate, and then move to isolate and quarantine, or do you flip that approach and do you quarantine and isolate and then test? And so that's where we made some adjustments to get people off the ship faster. It's a different of approaches, right? It's a difference of approaches, and perhaps our understanding now of what his point was. If I could just say something about the commanding officer of a ship, and so that's an extraordinary responsibility of command. And so he has authorities and he has responsibilities. And so he also is held account for the health and well-being of those 4,865 sailors on that ship. He takes it very seriously. And so if he has a difference of approach and he thinks he has a better way to do it, and if he doesn't feel that, we're acting at the speed of urgency, then absolutely we need to know about that, and we need to adjust. So I think that we have quickly responded and deliberately responded to the feedback received.
All right, David Larder on the phones.
Yes, sir. Thank you for doing this, David Larder, Defense News. Real quick, so there's a number of cases out there that we've heard about, small unit level outbreaks here and there. I don't know of any sort of widespread, every unit has it sort of thing, but I'm wondering how you're going forward, balance, risk, the risk that you take by continuing to operate these ships, and going forward, the risk that you take that the virus will impose a readiness problem on those ships, even if you don't have one when you leave. I guess, how are you balancing that risk of expanded outbreaks to more ships operating forward with, your clear desire to maintain presence? And is there any validity to the suggestion that maybe you should reduce your forward presence or reduce your operating tempo temporarily until this virus gets under control?
So those are discussions that are being held right now. We have made adjustments already to some of the operations that we intended to do. Some of the port visits that we intended to do have been canceled for that very reason. I'd also just like to emphasize we have about 94 ships that are deployed right now. The Teddy Roosevelt is the only one that has active cases on board right now. Some of the other ships that we have that have some active cases on it are in port, not deployed ships, and those numbers are all in the single digits. We don't have any large outbreaks on any of the other ships that we have right now.